Right, I'm here for another episode of Thorinquiry, my interview series on my side channel here, and my guest for this one is going to be Atlas ASMR. Now, people might know if they've followed just generally my social media for a long time, ASMR is something as I've sort of to say it's a hobby sounds a bit weird. I would just say a side interest, just something that's, in the modern day, I could just say it's just part of my YouTube feed. It's just something that's sort of ubiquitous within my sphere, as it were. But I know for some people, one thing that's weird about this topic is I feel like it's one of those things that is still niche, but then within the niche, it's enormous. People might know some of the creators have millions and millions of YouTube subscribers. So Atlas here is someone who's done many, many ASMR pieces of content. So actually, I normally am not a big fan of interviews that are like a lot of the normal, usual questions, but I will start out on this particular topic. I think it's actually vital to ask, what is your background with ASMR? Like, do you have ASMR? Was it something you knew about in the past? Why do videos? It's the obvious first question, right?
Initially, it's just really nice to hear you being so open about it being sort of part of your YouTube channel. It's part of your YouTube feed, because it's sort of one of these weird topics that people sort of skirt around and don't necessarily often admit that they listen or watch ASMR. So I get ASMR, and my personal journey with ASMR started probably when I was a kid. It wasn't something that I knew was a sensation with a name, but it was something that for a lot of people who experience ASMR, it was just a very early. I think it might have just been in a doctor's room or something like that, where someone was speaking to me very sort of delicately and softly, and sort of over-explaining what the procedure was or something like that, and I could just feel this eruption of tingles up my spine. And ASMR is a very recently defined term, and the genre of content is even more recent still. And so when I discovered it about 2.5, 3 years ago, it was pretty cool to see that there was this whole corner of YouTube bent on eliciting the sensation within others. And then I sort of just bought a mic the next day and got started.
Yeah, I would actually say, I feel like it's a similar concept, because obviously, as you say, the terminology only really came around, actually, funnily enough, with the YouTube stuff, like the last 10 years or so, basically. Because I had a similar experience, which is, it's like once I sort of realized, it's actually a few years before it became famous, that it was a thing. There was something there that I just got a response from certain stimuli. What's weird is I actually noticed that, it was always there in my life, but I think I sort of rationalize it differently in my mind. So for example, as you're saying here, a classic example would be some sort of an examination. I'll give you an example of when I can remember vividly myself, which is when you're a kid and in England, they do those tests to see if you're colorblind. You know, the ones where it's different dots of different colors that make up a number inside a bunch of dots. And famously, obviously for everyone else, they're just seeing 8, 3 or whatever, but I wasn't seeing anything. But what I found was, when I think back on that, I think I rationalized it as maybe you just enjoy people giving you attention, or I don't know, in this case, feeling like you're getting an exam right, you're getting validation. But there was definitely something different behind it. I remember a long time ago, I think there was a radio show or something that had some scenes with a character playing a butler role. So you could see how this would already play into the role play aspect. And I remember I even did a little recording of that part of the show, and just kept listening to that part over and over, because I noticed it was giving me some weird vibe, as mad as it sounds, I would almost say, if people have never had ASMR, it's almost it's a sort of a whack way to describe it, but the sort of euphoria people get from something like smoking weed, I would say it's 1/100th of that or something. So it's nothing crazy, but you're getting sort of a pleasant sensation, and it sort of hits a familiar spot, as it were. So what I would ask you is this: you sort of alluded to it in your opening there. A lot of people actually are a bit shy about it, because the problem with this topic, it's also why it makes perfect sense that it's niche, but then enormous within the niche, is if you don't get this, it does just look like you're some sort of weird character. And there is even almost an implication you're into some sort of it's almost like a fetish or something bizarre, But all I'd say is, if you don't have it, if you do have it, it's just thinking people are weird for getting a massage. If you know the experience of a massage, I'm sure you love it. It's not weird to you, right?
Yeah, 100%. And it was, it's weird mainly because a lot of the population, we don't know what percentage of the population don't get it. And it's something that, but with people who do get ASMR, you don't really understand that other people don't experience a certain sensation that you experience. And so when you're trying to describe it to someone and they have no context for what this thing could be, they will immediately think, oh, okay, pleasurable sort of physical sensation that sort of, is elicited by sometimes role plays, sometimes various other sort of a sort of smorgasbord of what people might define sort of like kinks, but in a genre, they'll go, "Oh, that sounds sexual," or that sort of that is something I don't understand. It must be sort of weird. And of course, there is people get opposite reactions to sounds and stimuli, which is sort of termed broadly misphonia, where they might have an opposite reaction. The ASMR thing that you describe, the sort of like the sort of that sort of a tenth of someone's response to smoking weed or something like that. I totally understand. But people, I think, get sometimes quite a negative reaction as well to the exact same triggers. So it's all about sort of finding in this genre what may or may not work for you, and that's sort of part of the fun of this genre. But you can sort of understand why people would stay well clear of it, and why it has a sort of stigma attached to it that's sort of slowly being broken down over time. But of course, as the genre expands, the amount of weirdness expands as well, and so we're sort of navigating our own PR within the genre, I guess.
Sure. One thing I want to ask you about, look, this is going to sound a bit weird in the sense that we're both men, and obviously there's no implication implied with this, but I will say another thing I found very interesting about my own experience, because I like to sort of look at my own life like I'm an anthropologist examining an animal in like a David Attenborough documentary, you know, and I'm simultaneously the animal and the guy doing the narration, like, oh, now he seems to be, you know. So along those lines, when I look at my own experiences with ASMR, I will say, like, for example, a lot of the women who do ASMR, who have a very, like, feminine charm, it does in a weird way over time just make me naturally have a more positive response to them. I mean, I know in part because they're sort of giving me a pleasurable sensation and making me feel comfortable, but I do sort of feel like it does change my like sort of parasocial relationship with them. So like, look, I will say ASMR works just as well from men. I've noticed that, but there is something behind that. So what I want to ask you is obviously there are some people who do intentionally play into the sexual side, or maybe they even think, maybe inherent, they think there's some sort of an attraction aspect to it. What do you think on that topic? I know I'm just throwing it out there as sort of like do what you want. What do you think about that?
I think that because the sensation is so, I mean, we're sort of imitating something, that the sensation of someone being very close to you. And whether or not this is sexual or sensual, it's someone who is either touching you, either whispering at you, either sort of, you know, shining a light in your eyes, all the many, many weird and wonderful things people do in ASMR. You are imitating being right next to someone in the room and having a quiet moment with them. And that is always something that feels very sort of vulnerable, very bare, very, very stripped back. And so whether or not the content is sexual, I think it's natural to assume some familiarity with the character or with the person that you are listening to or watching. And that can be tricky to navigate as a creator, because often it means that viewers do sometimes form what would be a parasocial relationship with you. I mean, this is true of all YouTubers, but I think it's particularly true of ASMR, where you are inviting someone to sort of get close to you emotionally, in a sense. And you are trying to do things that, you know, like help them sleep, you know, help them sort of come off the ledge with their anxiety, or help them through things that, you know, unwind after a long day, de-stress. And these things, which are sort of inherently utilitarian, they help people. People can get a huge amount of benefit from ASMR, seemingly. And therefore, it does sort of establish something of a relationship there. I'm not sure if this is more necessarily female. I know that people in the ASMR sphere credit females as being slightly more maternal, having that much more sort of naturally comforting vibe. I can't really speak to whether or not that's true as a male ASMR artist. It's sort of hard to view that objectively. But it's sort of, we don't all do this with the same intention. You know, I'm not out to sort of give anyone a motherly vibe. Obviously, my videos are supposed to sort of relax and unwind in maybe a different way than someone else would. Yes. But it does, you can sort of understand why the audience may form attachments there. But then again, I look at some of the biggest YouTubers on the platform, and people have a huge amount of parasocial sort of fascination with these characters as well. So it's about trying to, as a creator, I think, draw your boundaries and strike a bit of a balance. And, you know, I think as ASMR artists, we have to be clear what we are as a brand, because it can be very, very easy to overstep, you know, to try and counsel where counsel isn't necessarily needed, or to be provocative in a way that will make your content be perceived differently, etc. So it's a quite the tightrope to climb, to tread.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, one thing I would say, because I want to ask your take on this, is in my own sphere where I'm doing video game content, I've often been entirely open from the beginning with my viewers, which is that I have the unique approach, which is I'm not trying to like figure out what do people want or what do people want from me. I genuinely just did it as a hobby initially. So I essentially just did what I wanted to see created and what, you know, what I envisioned could be a good piece of content. And I've always stuck with that as my compass. Like, my premise is if no one else is into it, then naturally my viewership will dwindle and I'll just disappear off into the clouds somewhere. You'll never see me again. But if I happen to be lucky enough to tap into something that other people are into, then they're going to enjoy it. But the problem becomes, because you'll notice most creators, I mean, in part just as a form of gratitude, do tend to like tell fans sort of the opposite of that. Like, I'm trying to do what you guys want. You know, it's all about you guys. I'm trying to make it for you. So I do feel like, unfortunately, part of being an influencer, YouTuber, whatever these terms are, almost does come with like the implication that you've got to sort of build up parasocial relationships, as it were, or encourage them, or at least like push people in that direction. So what I want to ask you is this. Obviously, like you said, we've already avoided one of the obvious pitfalls, which is, are people doing it overtly sexual? Like, the ones who are, it's pretty obvious. The ones who admit, the ones I want to ask about is this. I feel like, I think you sort of nailed it. Maybe some of it's also like intimacy, which to be fair can be involved within sensual/sexual environments anyway, but is something itself separate potentially. Like, obviously you get intimacy from your mother and other people in your life in that way that maybe people don't as an adult. So what I would ask is this: how much intention do you have when you're creating content? Like, are you thinking yourself of a certain demographic or type of person you're making it for? Are you doing it for yourself? How do you envision how you're intentionally creating your content?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I commend your attitude of making things entirely for yourself, because I sort of have that as well, where you sort of want to make things that you're passionate about, otherwise you won't enjoy it and your back won't be in it. And, you know, I haven't been doing it for the views, because it's very hard in this sphere to sort of test, I think, what works and what doesn't. And if you're constantly sort of trend jacking, then it leaves you pretty vulnerable, I think, in this particular space. And so I, much like yourself, have been sort of making what I want to make and watching the rest of the world catch up if they do. But it's tricky, because in this sphere, and I can see why a lot of people get stuck down the sexual or the sensual route. And I should say that there's nothing wrong with that if you're, you know, clearly labeling that, and if you are and if you're intending to do that. But as soon as you learn that, you know, I don't want to speak too broadly about genders, but as soon as you learn that showing a little bit more skin might make you 20,000 more views or whatever, or might make you a certain bit more money, and you're relying on this for an income, then you can see where that starts to unfold, and where the lines get blurred. And, you know, there's no judgment with that at all. However, in answer to your question, I have to be pretty intentional with the audience that I'm going for, even though that audience is me. It's also, I like to try and position my content as a bit of a gateway drug, I think, to ASMR, in that it can go down, you can go down a real rabbit hole with ASMR to get into some pretty wacky and wonderful and weird stuff. However, I want to see if I can be the sort of, trying to think of a good example in the sort of film world. I mean, I don't want to say Marvel, because that implies too high a quality, but like that sort of broadly appealing mass market ASMR that you might even enjoy if you didn't get ASMR the sensation, or you might even enjoy if you just randomly stumbled across it on YouTube, and, you know, for a second you'd be like, why is this weirdo speaking really, really softly? But then you might stick around and still find something to enjoy anyway. So that is sort of my intention. I'm not sure if I've sort of achieved that, but it's I think it is important to find your audience. And answer to your other question, whether or not I'm sort of like listening to what people are sort of feeding me by way of ideas and things. I mean, you always want to sort of be responsive to your audience, and that you're not sort of entirely ignoring them, because they are your lifeblood, you know, even though it's interesting, because when you're a smaller creator, this relationship between you and your audience is symbiotic. You know, you rely on them very much on an almost individual level for their patronage. They are the ones putting the bread on your table, so to speak. However, when you get beyond a certain figure, these numbers, or these people, start to become numbers. You start to lose the faces. You start to view them more as a sort of demographic, as a collective of people, and then it's easier to become emotionally detached, and often in not an entirely good way. So you need to sort of try and stay in touch with, I think, with the people that you're making this for, because you know, at the end of the day, they are the court of public opinion that you are just trying to make content in. But I don't think it's, I don't necessarily think that they collectively have the best ideas for your channel.
I noticed that even when, because what's weird is it kind of ties back into what we were talking about at the beginning about how for some people ASMR is considered weird or they're slightly ashamed of it. Like even within ASMR, I feel like there's like some tiers or gradation of what people think is more weird than the rest. Like I think some people think like, for example, oh, I just like strictly know the scientific aspect of ASMR, so it's fine that you like tell me you're going to make these sounds and I'll just enjoy them. But they almost feel like the role play angle's weird, you know, whereas I have to say, I like the role play angle the best of all, man. I notice it's basically your content, just from top to bottom, almost. Like, what do you? What's so appealing about this? I mean, I would just say personally, I just find it very immersive when people do role plays. You know, I find it easy to sort of suspend disbelief, as it were.
Yeah, well, I'm sort of the same. I mean, like video games and like and films. I mean, particularly like video games have realized over the past decade, being a sort of new medium, they can tell a super effective story in this previously very sort of interactive, but previously not at all narrative medium. But now you see, you know, the likes of the God of Wars of the world telling some of the best stories in the market at the minute, including film. And I think that any new medium, really, if it's VR, if it's AR, if it's any of these sort of genres within these platforms, have the ability to tell stories. And I think that ASMR, even though it has sort of very defined utility, which is giving someone ASMR, helping someone sleep, helping someone relax, etc., you can also use that to tell stories. And I think the role plays are really effective ways of doing that beyond just portraying a figure in someone's life, i.e. sort of pretending to be a doctor or pretending to be a masseuse or whatever. I sort of typically stray away from those very sort of clear-cut, I am a doctor sort of character, and instead prefer to create something that feels more akin to potentially someone that they would see in a film or someone that they might see in a game or whatever the inspiration is, but immerse them into a world. And I sort of use ASMR as an excuse to do that.
Yeah, this is something I want to ask about because actually even within the field of role players, as you alluded to, a lot of the role players, I mean, the joke is 95% of role players ever in ASMR are just cranial nerve examinations. We all know it. Yeah. And some people, fair play to the ones who are really good at it, they even lean into it and they'll even have sort of the skit of like, oh, you're back for another cranial nerve exam. Because it's like, if people are casual fans listening, obviously it's something you very rarely ever get done in real life. But the joke is if you like ASMR role players, you've sat and had one done about 1,000 times. We all have. Like, some of us even watched the same video again. But I do notice, as you say, you don't like those type of people. I've noticed it tends to be a bit more lo-fi, as it were, and they're just using simple props. And the premise is almost like, look, you know who I am, so here's me as a doctor, like you say. Right now, here's me as a dentist. Right? Do you like me? Right. Well, here's me as a police officer. You know, arresting you for not being asleep or whatever. Whereas I've noticed in your style, it does feel like you're trying to make a different character, right? Like it's like it could be a scene from a movie, essentially.
Well, the quite sort of the quite nice situation that ASMR lays out is that you could literally almost do anything and it would still fulfill its purpose of being ASMR. So it's a sort of no loss situation for a lot of these creators who can just speak to camera, just sort of ramble, tell you about their day, just sort of take you on a bit of a walk through their life, etc. And you will presumably, if you get ASMR, still have a pleasurable experience with it. And so it sets up some channels able to do cranial nerve exam after cranial nerve exam, see no diminishment in views, because that's exactly what people are after. People are after this sort of often repetitive content, but also it's a unique genre in that you can come back to the same video over and over and over again and get the same amount of enjoyment from it until that enjoyment fades, which is what people sort of call like tingle immunity in the community, where you would sort of try and find another creator or another video or another genre. But yeah, it is something where you do find a lot of these sort of clear-cut role plays where people would have experienced a cranial nerve exam, would have experienced ASMR during that. And so that's pretty well searched for. And to your earlier question about whether or not you want to make these videos for the audience, for the demographic, I mean, if you want to make ASMR videos that people will watch, you do a cranial nerve exam. And so it's very hard not to fall into that trap for sort of courting views. In answer to what I do, I'm more interested in sort of, I mean, without sort of being too grandiose, trying to sort of push the creative envelope for myself, because I know that I am not super interested in doing stuff that's already out there in droves. You know, I think there is more sort of creative fulfillment to be able to create your own universe, your own ways of doing ASMR, and because this is such an underexplored genre of content, being able to find new triggers, new ways of potentially doing things, push the boundary of whether or not ASMR has to be all of these conventions that people associate with ASMR, i.e. done by a woman, or done in a hospital room, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm trying to sort of break down what that might be.
Sure. I mean, along those lines then, one thing I want to ask was this. This is like a mixture of a technical question and just sort of what your vibe is. So the other reason I get the sense as to why some content creators do make it like they're in the same room, the same props, they're just doing a different variation of the same video is like, first of all, as you said, if that's what someone's into, like I'm definitely not besmirching people who like cranial nerve exams, love a good cranial nerve exam myself. I've watched a million videos. Thanks. And as you say, if it's just something you want another one, a fresh one, brilliant, I'll watch that video too. So I would say in some sense people are almost incentivized to do it that way, more of like a simplistic approach, just a lot of volume, which is a classic way with content, whereas yours is essentially the opposite. If people go and look how many videos are on your channel, they're probably going to be shocked there's not that many, despite how many they'll remember. So it seems like you're putting a lot of effort into each video. Like essentially the technical question is this, is like, do you intentionally give up the fact that you could also put a lot of like more simplistic filler content on there and it could make you money, you could build the channel? Do you intentionally ignore that? Is there a reason you're sort of going, I mean, the analogy would be if everyone else is doing it like a TV show, you're trying to make it like a movie, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's a personal thing. It's a real personal hang up being, I have this own sort of philosophy of something deserving to be on the internet, which was sort of blasted apart, you know, sort of 10 plus years ago when everyone started uploading their entire lives online. And I never sort of connected with this idea of sort of full on documenting your every thought. It totally wasn't me. And so I tried to sort of limit through social media back in the day, through the MySpaces, the Bebos, the whatever, how much of myself was actually online, because I didn't want everyone to know every bit about me. And so going through to my YouTube channel, everything sort of feels slightly intentional, like I could be sort of live vlogging ASMR every day, where people would sort of get to know me and my personality, and the ASMR would become much more personal and about me. However, I sort of wanted to remove that a little bit, considering that I don't think that I'm a natural sort of clear-cut YouTuber. I don't think that I necessarily belong as a personality online. So I project my voice and whatever into characters, into worlds, into things that don't necessarily represent me, and that I can sort of be a figure behind them, which I much more enjoy the idea of. And so whether or not, I mean, I've occasionally done the live stream and I've occasionally done a sort of what one might call a filler video, and it never gives me as much satisfaction as sort of pouring a little bit of my heart and soul into something that might take me a couple of weeks or a month or whatever, that I feel like actually to my own standard deserves to be online. And don't get me wrong, I delete, unfortunately, plenty of my videos because they fall short of that standard at some point. But that's just how I operate, and that's just my brain.
Because what I find interesting about that is I actually, in my field, have the opposite content approach. Like I am really just the guy where it's all you need is a vocal cords, some oxygen and a mic and a camera, and you could potentially compete with me. That's what I'm doing. I'm just doing videos every day. But I will say, again, by observing that, one thing that has made me realize though is, like, even though that might, to someone who doesn't do many pieces of content, that might sound like, wow, you're doing so much stuff. It's like, yeah, but that has its own upside. Like, I'll give you an example. If I'm just doing a piece every day, and because it's just me talking to a camera and there's going to be another video tomorrow, I actually can to some degree sort of like put it out of my mind if I think I didn't do as great a job on the video as I wanted to. You know, I can sort of think, whatever, I'll get it next time. Or if, you know, if it's a big enough topic, I'll do it again in 6 months. But if you're doing content your way though, to be fair, I'm sure it also carries the opposite pressure, right? Which is like, if you put all that time into it and you've tried to really go for a high bar, and as you're saying, if you might have even done what to other people's a really great, like 8 out of 10 piece, but to you, if it falls short, I mean, I imagine it puts a lot more pressure on the content, right?
It does, and I'm very envious of the way that you can do it, and of the way that many YouTubers and content creators generally can do it. Whereas if I was uploading something every day or every other day, you're right. You know, you can make mistakes. You can say something that you don't entirely mean because your opinion might change the day afterwards, and people sort of grow to know you rather than your content. And that there's something really lovely about that. Whereas with me, you're right. There's a little bit more pressure to sort of get it right. And but I still feel like that sort of works for the sort of thing that I try and make, just because I want them to, as I say, be able to stand alone without me as the personality force. It's sort of the difference between, you know, I sort of view a lot of YouTube content on a bit of a spectrum between sort of personality-led and idea-led, where on the idea-led side of things, you might see Mr. Beast, for instance. All of his amazing creations, let's say one is I threw myself out of a plane and landed into a vat of sharks. Like, you would click on that video, no matter who was producing that video. You know, I mean, you know, obviously Mr. Beast has a hallmark seal of sort of quality, but you would click on that video. However, Emma Chamberlain, for instance, or Casey Neistat, or Zoella, or any of these content creators who have absolutely become their own, like, or PewDiePie or something like that, you would click on any one of the videos that they do, because irrespective of the idea, because it's them doing it. And I think that most of us sort of fall in that spectrum somewhere, but I think that I naturally gravitate more towards the idea side. In that, I mean, maybe it's just insecurity on my bit, but I don't think that anyone wants to watch me every day. I think that's just my own take on that.
When you say earlier that you don't necessarily see yourself as a natural or whatever, and as I said, obviously there's more time between your videos coming out on YouTube. What I would ask you is this, right? I've followed YouTube ASMR since almost it was the beginning of the platform. Like a lot of the really old school people, just because I've been on the internet that long anyway, in my own work, etc. I've just been able to like get on the trend pretty early. And I can tell you, people who started to make your types of content, I won't mention the names, people might know, like a famous one would obviously be a very famous like science fiction travel agent role play, if people remember the one I'm referring to. When these first came along, these were like blockbuster moments, dude. Like I remember when some of these came out, where it was proper graphics, and they've tried to essentially nail every aspect and make it like a total visual, audio, immersive experience. The difference is, I remember seeing some of the people where some of these creators would have, you know, the side channel where they explain what they're doing and when content's coming. And mate, it sounds like each of these videos sound like they take them like 6 months to produce. And some of these people, it took them a long time, and they were working with teams of people, and they were talking about how they had to do this and that. Do you have some sort of secret? Because even though there's like there can be months between your videos, like you don't seem to give off the impression like it's some insane grind. But the amount of detail you put into these videos is like you've essentially done like 30 of those. And as I say, for some of the other people to do 2 ever was like a big deal, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sometimes just little tricks. You know, I think we're all filming in front of green screens at the end of the day. Like whether or not you're a cranial nerve exam. Well, I say we all are. A lot of us are. Whether or not you're a cranial nerve exam or whether or not you're doing something that I'm doing, I think the difference between some of the things that are sort of not trying to be labeled cinematic ASMR and what we do, I say we, generally referring to cinematic ASMR creators, of which there are many and some really wonderful examples. Is simply just a little bit more attention to things like lighting, things like props, things like scenery, things like sometimes scripting, structure, whatever. And so, I mean, I would literally just say, you know, my top performing video is me sitting on in sort of inverted commas, a train. And it's me on a green screen, just sitting there talking to camera. And even though there's a lot of sort of wizardry in post, which is me just sort of sitting over After Effects for many hours, it's not anything more than that. And so something like that, I mean, the train video is a good example. I could produce theoretically one of those every week. It's sometimes it's just the emotional tax of doing so that you don't necessarily want to be doing more than once every 2 weeks or so. But also, you know, I probably have only 50 or so videos on my channel simply for busyness reasons in my what I want to call my other normal full-time work life, where it's preventing me from being a full-time YouTuber sort of thing, you know.
By the way, along those lines, when you say that, like it's just hours and hours in After Effects, the added B program, etc., that in itself, do you actually enjoy that part? Like that in itself could be very draining. The amount of hours you have to put in those things, and you get very fiddly. Do you actually get satisfaction out of the raw technical aspect as well?
100%. For me, the world creation is some of the most exciting bits. So there was a video I did where I was sort of being a steampunk wizard of sound sort of thing, where I was in a sort of castle in the sky or some stuff. I can't remember what it was. It was called The Inventor, and I sort of sketched out the world in advance and saw loads and loads and loads of. I made mood boards on mood boards and really sort of designed the world. I enlisted the help of a writer to help me sort of develop this lore of the sort of world that I wanted to create. And then afterwards, I spent loads of time in Photoshop and After Effects and Premiere Pro in sort of recording floating elements around my house and various sort of textures and light leaks and things. And I love that bit. I mean, that sort of feeds into what I do in my real life, which is very much sort of Photoshop artistry. And that's the bit, creating these universes that don't actually sort of physically exist, that we can sort of transport someone to. It might sound a bit sort of high-minded, but that's what I'm trying to do. And I love that bit. Yeah, absolutely. That for me is as important almost as the sounds, because if we're talking about something being immersive, and I think that ASMR really benefits from being immersive, because if you are trying to unwind, you are trying to escape, and if you are trying to escape, then the more detailed a world you can sink someone else into, I think, is really important. And that's a sort of standard that I set for my channel, is that can you completely take someone out of fiction that they know or their current world and sort of make them dream your dream, sort of thing. I sort of think that if this is dream content, why not give someone the coolest dream possible? Which is why I think a lot of my things that I try and create tend to sort of be power fantasies. They are you as in a sort of plane, or they're you in a video game, or they're you in a very expensive hotel, or they're you on a spy mission, or they're you in a gangster heist plot. These are cool, seemingly sort of cool situations for someone to be in. If I can try and take you there with not only my words, but also with the design of it, then why not?
Yeah, another thing I was going to ask about as well is, like, as I alluded to before, ASMR can be very effective, even when you know this is the same person from the last video. This is just them in their bedroom. I've seen them in this room before. You know that, like, that isn't really a prop for a medical piece of equipment. It's just a pen, But yeah. I've always thought ASMR also does work very well as sort of theatre of the mind. Essentially, if you can just provoke the response, it can work and it can be entirely effective. But I will say the difference when I've watched pieces like your content and some of the ones I alluded to before that were very, like, full level production, is when you don't sort of need the mind to conjure up the image, when it really is like you feel like you're getting that experience through the audio, through the visual. I think it does have a different effect. Actually, it almost engages me more. I feel like I get drawn in a bit more. Whereas to me, the other ASMR, like, it's like it works, but put it this way, I could get the same effect if I had it on like the second monitor and I was scrolling through something. Whereas the difference is I would watch your video full screen, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, well, that's very kind to say. I mean, I think that there are many ASMR artists out there that will do a cranial nerve exam with, like, intentionally vegetable props, for instance, or the wrong props.
Sure.
And they will create situations that feel bizarre rather than fully realistic. And I think that that's something that my channel is yet to fully sort of realize, is that I quite like the idea of something being very surreal, or when your dreams, you're in that sort of hypnagogic state between waking and sleep, and your brain doesn't really make sense of things anymore. I think that ASMR sort of in a cinematic way could explore slightly more abstract themes, like being in a cranial nerve exam and using the wrong props. So I think that all of these things have their own markets for sure. I think that I don't think that cinematic ASMR is necessarily any more effective than lo-fi ASMR, because these things at the end of the day fulfill very similar purposes. It's just up to the expression of the ASMR creator in this case. And I don't think that I would personally be very fulfilled by doing lo-fi ASMR. I've tried it, and it really just did not give me the same. I mean, the raison d'etre of the channel is very much to transport, and that just didn't work for me. But that said, the type of ASMR that I consume isn't cinematic ASMR, because I find it too interesting, and I find it too I find it too engaging, and it almost feels like homework. I'm sort of watching the things that they create, and I'm like, this is so cool. Like how am I going to get inspired by this? Whereas the ASMR that I prefer to watch is very much creator against black background, sort of just talking to you, whispering facts, or talking to you about their favorite watch or perfume or something like that.
Oh, by the way, along those lines, I'm sure this would be very interesting to other content creators to hear, but I've no doubt a lot, I mean, I see it in the comment section of your videos, a lot of the other ASMR content creators, like I always describe it like this, that famous phenomenon that people have observed where like, you'll get a lot of women who have like straight hair, so they're obsessed with making their hair curly, and then the woman that has the curly hair is using the straighteners all the time. Everyone knows it's like the grass is greener principle, basically. Like they want what they don't have currently because they imagine, right? Well, since I don't have it, that must be what's going to make me fulfilled or feel happier, or that's the change I need. I will say I've noticed in creative endeavors, it's pretty much the same. It's the reason why, if you notice, even in celebrity worlds, like of course the guy who's the pop singer who everyone is adoring when he's at the concert, he's the one who's obsessively going and watching the best tennis player or something and wishes he was the tennis player. Everyone has that thing. So I've noticed in creative fields, what you're describing now basically is people are always sort of a bit jealous of the skills they don't have, or like someone who does the style that they can't nail, or they like when it's their off time, but it's not what they do in their main job. So I'm sure a lot of people look at your work and think, wow, how does he get those like production value levels, where the ideas come from? But I've no doubt there's types of content you're watching, you're getting the same vibe, right? What elicits that vibe from you?
Oh, 100%. And you'll find me skulking in the comments of many a creator. It's really interesting. I mean, sort of, I have some friends who are sort of peripherally in the celebrity world and the celebrity sort of styling world, and sort of, exist in the world of actors. And they shed a particular light on those dynamics where everyone is looking at everyone else. We sort of plebs look up at this world of Hollywood and perceive everyone, sitting on their shining thrones, where actually, between every gig they are unemployed, or their star is dimming, and there is always someone slightly more famous than them and slightly better at this particular thing than them, and whatever. And there's a very interesting sort of dynamic, as you say, between creatives. And you can see actors going to play, going to the Wimbledon, etc. And everyone is inspired by everyone else, but everyone is always sort of commenting on everyone else. And this is true, of course, in YouTube as well. I mean, there are many creators that I would say that in my own genre, real shining stars of the genre, and certainly tick certain boxes far better than I do. I mean, we all have our own individual, unique mixtures, little cocktails of sort of talents and personalities and whatever, and people will watch us for those individual cocktails. But there are so many creators that I completely adore. Are you asking me to name names?
No. I mean, I just moment like the vibe. Like, is there, for example, is there a style that you look at and you're like, I'd love to do that, but it's just not me. I can't do it, or it's just not something I've ever put the time into.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, the sort of very simple stuff, the things that you were alluding to before. I mean, the simple stuff where someone will talk to me about their favorite fragrance, or sort of take me on a sort of pretend seller's journey of all of their favorite fragrances, is something that I completely adore. I love having people tell me in extreme detail about things that they are passionate about. And I think that applies to anyone in life, not just in the ASMR genre. I think people really respond, particularly on like on a date, or, at a dinner party or whatever, when someone is telling you in extreme detail about something that they love, something that they are knowledgeable about. You love listening to that. And that is my favorite type of content, genre irrespective. I think that is so nice. I mean, I'm typically a male ASMR fanboy, and I think that people who people often, I think, are a little surprised by that, because I don't get the tingles from. I say the tingles. I hate the term the tingles. I wanna get that term. I find it just such a strange, not necessarily totally endearing bit of PR for ASMR. But anyway, I get the tingles from exclusively male ASMR artists, because I think it sort of harks back to an early childhood when the people who were giving me ASMR back then, which was very much my grandpa reading to me, the sort of doctor, the whatever, that sort of harks back to that. And so my content that I absorb tends to mainly be male, even though I watch all types of content for general interest. But the stuff that gives me, that sparks my ASMR, is male. But it speaks to it not really being a sexual thing at all. At least it makes it a very clear cut thing in my brain, because I'm straight, I'm not necessarily particularly attracted to guys, but I get ASMR from that. And so this confusion that exists in some people, I don't really have at all.
Right. One thing I want to ask was, you alluded to it earlier, but the other thing about your role plays is they always have some element. This is also, I think it just plays into the idea of like fiction. They remind me almost of like Terry Gilliam films, where there's always like an extra flight of fancy that he puts in. There'll be like a sort of a poetic angle to it, or the dream logic or something. And it seems like, as you said earlier, yeah, you don't just do the video like, right, look, I could do a really awesome like video of me on a plane. It's like, if it's me on a plane, then it's going to be me when like planes just started, and like, here's what a newspaper from that time would look like, and here's like the conversation people might strike. Like you almost have sort of a bent to it, right? Like essentially, without asking the old classic, where do your ideas come from? Like how do you get from I'm going to do something about a plane to that very, very specific fictional conceit that you always seem to arrive at? Because I'd say, look, even though it's going to be different each time, there's sort of a through line of how you arrive at the angle. As you said earlier, like it won't just be an inventor, it'll be some sort of steampunk / semi-futuristic inventor to allow you to put a little flourish in, right?
Yeah. I sort of quite like the idea of not really living up to someone's expectations, or sort of changing expectations halfway through, or there being some sort of twist, or there being some way of subverting a sort of certain message or theme. And again, like this is me talking aspirationally. This is me, what I sort of try to achieve, and each video sort of potentially sort of meets that or doesn't in a different way. But for instance, with the plane video, with the train video, whatever, I was like, okay, what if you were having a perfectly nice conversation with a stranger, but then suddenly they die? Or what if you were having if you just sort of met a friend and you're having a night out, but you're not quite sure of what your sort of relationship is, but it turns out that you're on some sort of like mission together. And there's always, I think, a need from me to provide a sort of hook. Sometimes it's easy to think sort of cynically in terms of what YouTube does and doesn't reward. But it's sort of different with ASMR, because you do expect people to fall asleep to them. You do expect people to sort of tune out to them. So you don't necessarily want to provide too much entertainment content, you know, in a sense. But there is sort of objectives for me, and I try and challenge myself every 5 minutes, not in a formulaic way, but challenge myself to try and subvert expectations, to try and change the path of the hero's journey, broadly speaking. And often this sort of results in themes that I don't think are necessarily naturally relaxing. Like I like to flirt with the idea of sort of often sort of death and pain and comedy and sort of things that, or as you say, sort of poetry, and sort of bring in sort of different things that aren't necessarily things that other ASMR artists are doing, because I want to try and see if I can find a different way of exploring this sensation, which, you know, sometimes is successful, sometimes isn't. But it's all sort of, I mean, I call my channel experimental rather than narrative, because I'm sort of throwing different things at a wall to see what sticks in that respect, in a narrative respect.
Along those lines, I'll throw a name out there. One content creator I very much enjoy, who's very much on the lo-fi end, is Danny Dorsile, if people know him. And he's a guy where his whole style is that everything's like subvert expectations, make it weird. Like if people don't know, one of his most famous series is like backroom roleplay angles. So the joke is, instead of it being like a guy giving you a normal cranial nerve exam, it'll be a guy like fucking up your cranial nerve exam, and at the end, like maybe even explaining how he's going to have to like take your eye out or something mental. And what's bizarre, the reason I specifically bring him up as the example is, it has the exact same ASMR effect somehow, dude. Like, I don't really understand it myself, because I would have thought the things you're saying must be somehow built up as to why I'm getting the effect, and the fact that you're putting me at ease, etc. Whereas essentially he's doing that, but then the actual imagery sometimes can be quite disturbing. But I feel like it doesn't prevent it having the ASMR effect. What do you think on this topic? It seems like there's still a mystery around what it really is, right?
Oh, 100%. And there are so many people doing sort of aggressive ASMR and ASMR that's totally in your face and fast, and something that I would term entirely unrelaxing. But for some people, it just gets them going. And there are people doing murder ASMR. There are people doing ASMR that's intentionally creepy and weird. There are people doing some really exploring and plumbing the depths of what this thing could be, what this thing could actually be. And I think that they, all of them have such a commendable mission. Like, I think that is exactly what we should be trying to do. It's such a bizarre new field that we have no idea what is and won't and will spark someone's ASMR. So I think that, comedy ASMR has its place. I think that there are so many different, like Danny Dossel is a great example of someone who really, really likes to make people laugh, as well as elicit that sensation. But it's yet to be sort of properly understood how these things can sort of combine. Music and ASMR. Music and ASMR, I'm sure, is a huge untapped genre. Well, you see
that, yeah.
You see so many of these creators like ASMR Beats and ASMR, well, a lot of them anyway, are creating these ASMR soundscapes that are really, really interesting. I mean, I have no idea how far that can be pushed. I have no idea if ASMR can make its way into popular music, if it can make its way into rock, if it can make its way into whatever. I have no idea. Seeing ASMR sort of brought into movies, into all these sort of different formats is just such an interesting proposition. And so, if we get into talking about the future of ASMR, that's sort of where I would really hope for these things to be pushed. But yeah, I mean, we find some completely bizarre and very sometimes aggressive, unrelaxing things that do it for a lot of people.
One thing I did want to ask along these lines, actually, about like the concept of like what the future might be for videos goes like this, which is in your videos, like, look, I know enough about computers. Like once upon a time, another lifetime ago now, I did want to be a computer programmer. So I understand how like 3D graphics engines work. And essentially, if people don't know, from about the early 2000s onwards, especially if you're, let's just say, unscrupulous about how you acquire a program, as long as you have a computer and it's fast enough, you can basically do almost anything. You can just do everything Hollywood can do. You can do everything a computer game, video game creator could do. Essentially, just, do you have enough man hours and do you have the skill to pull off the techniques and do you know how to use the programs? But if you do, like I say, once you've acquired the program, the actual cost can be very, very cheap. So what I would ask is this. Do these videos actually cost much money to make? Because like the production value seems impossible to me for one guy. Like essentially what I would ask is that. And then the follow-up question is, would it even change anything if you had like $1 million to make a video? It feels like you're already getting pretty much like movie quality cinematography in yours.
Again, you're too kind. I mean, I would love to have a much bigger budget. I mean, that would be really cool. I think the first thing I'd do with a much bigger budget is take me out of him and
hire someone else. Okay.
Yeah, and put a cast in there. I would be behind the camera and very much sort of create the thing and have more than me. I think they're slightly limited, I think, by the fact that they only have one person in them. But that's a slightly tangential subject of whether or not ASMR would work with a much larger cast. But I think that it's an interesting thing because I don't think that the videos necessarily make money on that respect, because yes, I do like to sort of, I mean, it's great when they do get views because that means the budgets for the videos get bigger and I can buy more props and I can buy more costumes and whatever. But I do try and do as much digitally as possible, which means that even though I'm very much making a loss on my time, if you're to think of it in that way,
sure,
I certainly am not expending that much. I've got lights, I've got a green screen, I've got myself. I tend to wear suits in a lot of them, and so I can sort of make do with what I've got around the house. So often they remain somewhat inexpensive. But that said, I do, in order to force myself to make videos, like to buy new lights to try out, like to buy new props to try out, like to buy new microphones to try out. So they are expensive just by virtue of me being a slightly fussy video creator, but they're probably not in themselves very, very expensive to make. I would love a huge budget to make an ASMR film. I could see I could see it totally working on, like, Netflix has this partnership with Calm and stuff like that. They're creating more, or Headspace. They're creating more and more relaxing content. It seems inevitable that an ASMR film at some point is going to be made. And that would be such an exciting thing to be attached to. What that would be with, let's say £5 million or whatever, I have no idea. I have no idea what form that would take. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's accelerate that sort of. Let's get to the future now. I mean, that needs to happen, right?
You alluded earlier as well about the concept of like collabs, etc. You've done them yourself, but I will say in general, that's actually one area I wanted to talk to you about, because even though you're obviously doing on your part of the collab the same high production, I actually do find that's a downside, is that when people who do high production quality ASMR content do collabs, that does take me out of it a bit when it swaps to the other people. And it's like, and I sort of in my brain, I know I shouldn't know this because I'm just the audience, but I do know that's a different guy in a different room and it's not the same like color palette. The quality of the camera's not as good. Somehow it doesn't quite hang together like I always hoped it would. Like sometimes I can like individually all the separate creators, but the collab angle, I know it's been done a lot because it was actually one of the original. I'm just talking to the audience here. If people don't know, it's one of the original ways that YouTube creators actually were able to sort of share audiences. Is you did a collab with someone back in the day, and it certainly works in that respect as far as I can tell for ASMR. But I don't know if the actual like product hangs together as well as individual videos. Do you have thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, it's strange because collabs were my channel's sort of, I don't want to say, it was the first videos that started doing well on my channels were collabs. So there's a collab called The Gentleman, which was one of my first, I think my first collab video that actually started doing numbers. And so I feel very fond of them as a format. I do understand why they don't work necessarily for immersion all the time, because you are very much asking people to film in different conditions with only a very loose outline of what you guys are all doing together. However, I think that the reason the way I try and get around that is by taking all the editing onto myself personally, and therefore trying to match as much of the look as possible. Where I think that other collabs are sort of, and I don't want to speak too broadly because some of the collabs that I've seen are so brilliant and do this so well. But often people are sort of just throwing their end product together into a sort of themed collab video.
Yeah.
And often they don't hang together super well, but they are quite a good sort of like tasting palette of new creators that you may not be exposed to. And I think that often they don't do so well in terms of, you're to speak generally about views and whatever. I want to make this a broad comment, because you are at someone's channel because you want to watch that creator, and if it doesn't reflect enough of their personality or reflect enough of them, then you don't feel like you're getting them. However, I try and leap that with some of my videos, because I sort of inject myself at several points in the video, or I'll take all the editing on myself so it all feels like my look, or I will write scripts so it feels like at least my voice, etc. So I think that they're a useful format. I mean, they're not sort of time and cost effective. They take a lot of time, but it's useful for, as you say, people to get more exposure either on someone else's channel, or if you host a larger creator on your channel, it can be quite a nice collaboration in that respect.
Along similar lines, one effect I've noticed, which even though my brain should tell me shouldn't work, does, is when people do the classic one where it's just the same person twice on the same screen. I've actually even done this myself, where I did like an interview with myself, not like yours where you actually were cutting between shots, but where you're like, you just stay on one side of the screen, then you just overlay it in like whatever video program you're using. But I've noticed you almost never use this. Is there a reason why? Because I actually find that one bizarrely can be quite effective, even though I do know it's the same person with my brain, Why do you never seem to use that in your content?
No, I haven't. So wait, explain this to me. You are twice on the screen at the same time.
Yeah, put it this way. You'll know some of the creators, like if you know the creator Valeria, she often does one where it's twins. It's just her twice, but they're on the exact screen. Yeah, exactly. They've just filmed where, she's just on the right-hand part of the camera when she films it the first time. The second half, she's on the left hand. And then obviously part of the trick is obviously scripting it so it seems like you're talking to the other person when you're not really in the same room. But I noticed you just never use this effect for some reason.
Yeah, I think I've thought about it before. It seems like a really, really easy thing to get wrong. I think it works really, really well for when it works, but you have to have what might be a 30-minute video so intricately scripted that it just constantly works and never. I just think that people would fall out of the realism of that. I mean, you can even watch Friends, where you have Phoebe and her twin sister, and sometimes they sort of get taken out of the moment because it's the same actor. Right. I think that these work because they're sometimes very, very small scenes, and they're limited in their sort of gimmick ability. Like the gimmick is sort of contained, whereas I think if it's me, and who knows, I might do it at some point, but I think it's a tricky thing to get right.
One thing I want to ask about, because this might seem like, because I've worked on the technical aspects of YouTube and behind the scenes myself, I'm also able to sort of understand things that people might never give any thought to. So one thing I want to ask was, and you're a perfect person to ask, is I feel like, one of the cursed things in a way about YouTube is it's such an amazing vehicle to get out there for ASMR. And obviously it's one of those types of content which I assume must have amazing retention levels, because I know I just put the whole video on, and when the video ends is when I go to the new video video, I don't like halfway through skip to a new video. I almost always just put it on. So you're getting viewers that are watching for insane amounts of time, but then the downside is it's literally the type of content that if you bang too many ads in is going to ruin the whole experience. So how do you weigh that up? That sounds like a really tricky tightrope to walk on. Because on the one hand, great news, people want to watch for hours and hours and hours, and you might get millions of views. But on the other hand, you can't be quite as aggressive necessarily as other types of YouTube content. What would you say?
No. Yeah, well, I think YouTube naturally penalizes that, because if we're only able to sort of take one ad out at the beginning of our content, it means that our CPM or whatever we make per video is incredibly low compared to a lot of the other creators, which I think sort of makes people, if we're talking about the volume of work like we were before, I think that's quite a sort of good incentive for people to put out more rather than what I do, because you would theoretically be able to place more ads that way. However, we have to be really intentional with how our channels make money, and this is assuming that you're in YouTube to make money or at least break even, which many people are not. Like, you know, it's not many of our full-time jobs. Sure. For some of us, it's just a passion or a side hobby or whatever. But you certainly don't want these things to cost you a huge amount of money. So the ad revenue can be useful. And when you're only able to place one ad at the beginning of your video, that can be tricky. It also, I mean, these things do sometimes, you know, some of the most simple ASMR videos get millions and millions and millions of views. I think a few years ago, people cottoned onto that pretty quick, and the genre became very, very saturated of people trying to make a quick buck. And you can see this now in terms of just the sheer volume of ASMR videos that are created. And I don't have stats to hand, but certainly since 2018, there was a huge wave of creators joining the ASMR hype train. And that, of course, being so competitive leads to a sort of environment where there is a lot less money to go around, theoretically, on the YouTube pool, and you need to work a lot harder to try and make your voice unique. And I think that you know, sort of we all find our niche at some point, and me finding a niche that feels very mine is useful in that respect. But I still don't envy the person who is starting a YouTube channel today and starts tapping on shoes and expects to get 1 million views overnight, because it's very, very tough. And the ad revenue makes it tougher. So yeah.
As you've obviously alluded to, you also have like a separate life, and this isn't like the one thing you try to make the most money and get the most attention from. But even so, like one thing I wondered about was the type of monetization I could see working for you, especially, would be like, you might have seen some of the modern creators try to make the ad a part of the video almost. You know, they do a creative thing with the ad, or they do a role play for the ad in some way and make it not just like an ad read. It's like a fun way to interact with the concept and the product. So I could see that working very well in your channel. Is this not something you're interested in?
Yeah, I mean, I've done that once. So I did that with a video called Your Cinema Escape, where I effectively did a very long form ad for a cinema chain in the UK called Cineworld, and it was something I sort of grappled with, because even though it was a phenomenal opportunity, like they gave me the Leicester Square London Cineworld to actually film inside of, and that was just completely mental and very, very, very cool. But I think there's something slightly, I don't want to say sinister, but feeding people ads while they're sleeping is slightly sort of brainwashing.
Yeah, true. Let's try and follow that.
and I think that, you know, there's mileage, and I think not. I mean, it's tricky because a lot of what we do are like, we role play sellers. You know, we're trying to sell you something, and so it would make sense if the perfume that we were selling you was a branded perfume, or if we were selling you a watch that we'd been sponsored by a watch company. Like, these would all make sense in theory. I think it's probably. I don't want to sort of make this too moralistic, but I think that there is mileage in maybe limiting that, for me personally, in terms of how many messages from corporations you whisper in someone's ear while they're sleeping. I think that having your ad or your ad read, let's say if you're taking on a sponsorship at the beginning of your video, at least gives someone the option to skip that. But it is, you know, bonus ASMR content, as you say. Like, it is. It can feed into your video. Like, people really enjoy listening to these ad reads because it just feels like extra ASMR. So trying to strike a healthy balance is, I think, what all of the creators try and do in terms of their sponsorship money. I mean, don't get me wrong. If a really exciting partnership came across my email, then I would definitely look into it. But it's something I try and think pretty carefully about.
One thing I also would be very interested to know about, I'll set it up like this, right? Yeah. I am the sort of person where, like, I have also sort of branded myself as quite a, let's say, firebrand character. So I'm sort of allowed to get away with telling people I don't really care about like the validation of fans or just general people. It's not totally true. Like, obviously, when you begin and no one's watching any of your content, you want someone to watch, you want people to engage with it and someone to enjoy it. That is true. But I'm not, for example, like genuinely trying to get a certain amount of views. But within that, the downside is I have my own expectations. I have my own track record of how things do and what does well and what does badly, in a sense, and my own expectations for how things are going to perform. So the problem is, while on the one hand, if I think the piece of content I did is really awesome, I wouldn't care if it got 1,000 views or 100,000, or vice versa. If I did a piece I thought actually was not very good and people were telling me it was great and it got 100,000 views, I wouldn't necessarily feel great about it because it got 100,000 views. But where I'm getting to is this. I will say, if I have pieces that normally get, I'm throwing random numbers out here just as place marks. If I had like one that tends to get 10,000 and then I did a piece I think's amazing, like I've put a lot of effort into this, for me it's exactly the piece I would want to see, and then I put it out and it got 1,000 views, I would sort of feel like, I know it sounds messed up, but I would feel entitled. I would feel like, what the hell, that was one of my best pieces, like where are all the views? So what I'm getting at is this. I know people always want to either make it sound like, I'm just happy with whatever I get or whatever. Like, at the same time, one of the things I've noticed about your type of content is, because the big pieces you're doing have the chance to escape the normal sort of like event horizon of just a normal video, some of them can get millions of views, dude. I mean, like you're saying, the one that you had on a train has like 2 point something million. But then other videos, I mean, I think that the one that you did that was kind of like your version of the Grand Budapest Hotel, mate, I think that might be the best video you did, and that has what, like a tenth of the views? How do you handle that aspect? Like, is it not a bit of a punch in the gut when one gets 200k and the other has 2 million?
I mean, it's really interesting. It's a conversation that I think all creators have with themselves all the time. I mean, the hotel video that you're talking about came out really in the very early stages of my channel and did very, very badly at the time, just by comparison to where the channel is now, and was one of those videos that maybe did like 2,000 views or something like that, and then just grew over time, which made me think that really there is some sort of meritocracy in with my channel in particular, because I mean, I can see this with other people's channels all the time, where they'll do 10 cranial nerve exams in a row and one of them will pop off and the other ones won't. Yes. I'm like, why the hell does that happen? I think with my channel, why I say there's a meritocracy there is I can probably guess when a video comes out how it might fare based on who it will appeal to in my audience, and that's often just sort of like a gut thing, often an instinct thing. It's not really based on anything else. But I look up and down my sort of catalog of videos now, and I sort of go, yeah, I get it. I get why people like the ones that they like, and I get why some people didn't like the ones that they didn't like. Whether or not a passion project, when a passion project gets fewer views than I might expect, yeah, I mean that obviously always sucks. However, I have a circle of friends who will also, independently of the commenters on my channel, give me their take on my recent video. And for them, some of my most me videos, the ones that don't necessarily perform particularly well, but enable me to show something that I think is particularly creative or whatever, I will get a good reception from my friends or my family or something like that. And I think that being able to place worth in the people whose opinions mean something to you rather than the throng of thousands of people on the internet. I think you have to work out who you're making these things for. I mean, obviously, probably the people on the internet, but whose opinion that really sort of means the most to you. And I think that, if you can make things that you are really, really, really proud of, you really just gotta sort of believe in that. You really gotta stick with that. Like some of the favorite videos of my channel are the ones where I just sort of draw your happy place. Like, they're my favorite videos, where you're sort of trying to push the boat out creatively rather than sit on a train and sort of talk to someone. But you can see why those don't do so well. So I think it's about doing a healthy mixture of things that you think are for you and things that you think are for everyone else.
One of the things I found really like almost unique about having an audience, like something I didn't expect, was Even though on the internet it's easy maybe to just think, well, look, it's just numbers on a screen, you know, the number got bigger, whatever, it's only an extra digit or something. I've even had experiences from when I've done events in the real world, as it were, when I've had thousands of people in a stadium, etc. What I would say is this, is if no one's ever experienced it before, it doesn't really sort of compute in my brain, as it were. Like, for example, if I'm doing an event in front of a big audience, well, I'm actually busy thinking about whatever I'm talking about, or I'm engaging with that. I'm not really thinking of like how many people are here and are they actually just listening to me. Like, I'm not really ever like, that's never really being processed by my brain. And then when I put things on the internet that might blow up and get lots of views, I can't really, like, it doesn't really almost feel real to me. Like, sometimes I wonder if it's all fake and I'm just one guy in a room and it's just like the internet demons are just putting the numbers up to make me think I did well on that video. So what I would ask you is this, is it surreal still to have videos that can have millions of views?
Oh, totally. I mean, like you, I think it's impossible to comprehend. And I think it's really like you try and think about those numbers and you just like to quantify them in real terms, you know, like 2 million plus people is like, you know, full on. Like, no, it's more than stadiums of people, and you can't put all these people in one room, and therefore you can't really sort of properly quantify them in your head. So yeah, I mean, it's of course totally bizarre. I mean, this game that we play as being sort of social media creators, there is always, I mean, why these numbers are sort of put into perspective is the second you go on TikTok and see 30 million views on someone dancing, you know, you go, oh, I mean, it sort of, it doesn't diminish what you do, but it sort of makes you go, oh, there are loads of people jacked into the matrix of the internet at any one point, watching the craziest stuff. So I think that stuff is very useful to keep one grounded, you know, to keep, I'm constantly trying to play a game with myself to try and, keep it all sort of real and sort of be present and, you know, not like, I think it's very easy to have a delusion of what actually you are to people the second you gain some sort of notoriety. Like I remember when my first video sort of took off, which was the train one. It must have got, you know, it was my first video with something like 40,000 views overnight or something like that. And I was like, oh, I don't know. It stressed me out a lot. You know, I didn't feel like a particularly nice sensation because I was like, oh, there are thousands of people commenting on something that I've made. And I think sort of constantly trying to sort of gain perspective on that is something of a fool's game because it can sort of trick your mind into or sort of change what it is that you're making. Because in reality, you want to be making for the same people that you were making for when you first started your channel, rather than making for an increased audience now. So I think it's very easy to sort of see creep in the work that you do when your audience grows. So yeah, to answer your question in simple terms, no, it's very, it's not real to me. I can't really properly comprehend it. No, I mean, there's always someone bigger than you and always someone smaller than you. So I think that all creators should always feel constantly humbled by that.
Another thing about having an audience I wanted to ask you about is, right, look, I do get that, to be fair, I've no doubt you get horrible comments and stupid, silly people nitpicking you and all that jazz because it's just the nature of the internet. But the problem in my field is, because I'm giving opinions, which if people don't know, essentially what I do is just like, instead of like Roy Keane talking about football, I'm doing that but about a video game tournament. So unfortunately, my content is fodder for people to naturally have like a hostile response. Like you can imagine if you have a strong opinion about a football team, there's someone's going to be a fan of the other team or think you're hating on their player or whatever. You can see how easily there's going to be a lot of like vitriolic comments coming back your way. And so the problem I've found personally with having an audience is, originally, I tried to just do that thing of like, right, you know, we're all adults here, so like I can take the criticisms, I can take the negative comments, I'll just, you know, I won't let it bother me too much, I'll let it sort of just float on by, I'll focus on the good one. But the problem I found is like, as it scales up, to me, it becomes almost untenable. Like at this point, I'm not exaggerating. I've just read too many comments on the internet, mate. Like at this point, I have to cut them all out. It's not about whether they're good or bad even. It just, eventually it made me feel almost like, not that I'm going mad, but like I've got voices in my head because I literally have other people's voices in my head every day. I'm reading thousands of other people's thoughts. And what I think fans will never understand is some of the ones that might be the most distressing are sometimes very light-hearted ones. It might just actually be a real fan even trying to give you some advice, but the way they do it might just arrive at exactly the wrong time. And you just feel like, man, is everything I do being like picked apart and criticised and scrutinised? And it can be maddening. I've found that. So look, I know you're in a different space than me, but I wondered, what is your experience in this regard? Like, how do you engage with fans? How much do you read? Do you have filters? Do you have some sort of system in place? What's your experience like?
I mean, it's a really interesting question, and I don't necessarily envy someone in your position at all, because I think that our demographics and our audiences probably skew quite differently in terms of their response. And as you say, you're sort of commenting on some quite contentious things, and often I'm not. Often I'm sort of taking a safe route where you're trying to make someone feel safe, and the only negative comments that I would get would be from someone who didn't necessarily understand, had just stumbled across my video on search and been like, "What the hell is this?" But otherwise, you know, like I have 99.9% really, really nice comments. But the thing that I do slightly envy of your position, or sort of general YouTube positions, is that discourse is, I think, useful for sort of conversation around creative things. And I think that, or even opinion pieces, you know, getting conversation going can be a really, really useful facet of content and the internet generally. And it's only become I've only become aware of the drama sort of economy recently, where, I mean, I've always really, really stayed clear of trying to sort of say anything sort of too overtly political, and being conscious that I could offend someone. However, recently, I've just become aware that offending someone is sort of the name of the game, and that people are going to get offended, and that these things are good for engagement and likes and views, and people sort of talking about drama, and talking about drama of drama, and sort of existing in the drama circle is how people form careers online, and how some of our favorite content creators, you know, people who exist in the gaming space and the sort of variety space and the whatever space, are constantly commenting on this world around them, and people are constantly in their comments disagreeing with them. And this is how they are so successful. This is how that they are so, I mean, people are so very tribal on the internet, obviously, but it doesn't need to be perceived as a bad thing. It doesn't need to be sort of shied away from. It can be weaponized. It can be harnessed. It can make you powerful. And this is what I've noticed recently, and it's changed my perception of that slightly. I mean, when I get a negative comment, it is always your one's reaction to take it personally. You know, for every 99 amazing, you'll get one negative comment, and you'll go, oh, you'll ignore the 99 positive ones, and you'll go, oh, this negative one really gets me and really knows exactly what I was, you know, how I bunged up with my content. But of course, you know, this isn't at all true, but their comment will really stick with you. And so, like you, I've sort of had to put sort of shields up, metaphorically, in order to filter what I do and what I do and don't consume. And so these days, I don't really reply to comments for my own sort of my own brain, because I think engaging with them too much does open yourself up to sometimes being attacked. But I think as my perspective on it changes and shifts constantly, I'm willing to sort of reevaluate how much I engage with it, because I think engagement is good. And I think that harnessing the good and the bad, however people respond to your content, is only good for your content and you as a creator and you as a platform. I think if you have a space where people can come to vent, people can come to whatever, I think it's only beneficial.
Another thing I want to ask, to loop back into the idea of what is the future of ASMR, or maybe the future of ASMR for you specifically, is I've also noticed another thing I vibed with about your content is when I make a type of content, and in the way that I do it, I have almost like an unlimited appetite for that. Like the things I like, I mean, it's why I said before, I am the guy who watches a million cranial nerve exam. And if the same person puts one out tomorrow, I'll be clicking that too. Don't worry about it. I'll watch the same one 5 times in a night while I'm doing something else. But I've noticed that it's not everyone's like that. Some people like to do something once and then feel almost like Boy Scouts. Like, I've got that badge, right? I'm going to do something new now. And for some people, it's all about innovation. They want everything to be new, everything to be something they've never experienced before. What is the approach for you? Because I get the vibe you've sort of got your groove, and you know how to stick in the cart, and you know what you want it to be like, and you've got a pretty good sense for when it's good now. But what you were talking about earlier alluded to the idea of maybe do you feel as though you've plateaued? Do you want to break through a different type of concept? Where are you at in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think things work until they don't, right? Like you will find a sort of you'll slot into a groove with YouTube or any content where people start enjoying what you're making, and so you sort of lean into that groove further. And then I think with I think Wes Anderson is a very good example. Speaking of the hotel video, I think Wes Anderson's a good example of someone who had his thing for a while and became self-parody. He started doing the Wes Anderson thing, and then the Wes Anderson thing started doing the Wes Anderson thing, and so I'm conscious that there's a limit to which I can do my thing before I start slipping into self-parody. And I mean, hey, maybe people want to see self-parody, but I always want to sort of be in a position where you can sort of take things and you can be small and nimble enough to take things in a new direction and innovate without the pressure of losing subscribers, losing views, losing money, whatever. Which is why it's quite helpful when you don't rely on this for your full-time income, because you can be a little bit more sort of explorative, because the videos don't need to have loads of views on them. That said, the creativity is often the enemy of success with these things, as we know from the cranial nerve exam, and pushing the boat out too far or leaving your subscribers behind is probably not something to do lightly. And so you sort of try and take very small steps towards sort of different things, different ways of exploring the genre. Like, I would love to do something big budget, or I'd love to try something in VR, or I would like to, do something out in the real world rather than a green screen or whatever. But you do want to do it in a way that feels digestible and safe for your current audience. So it's tricky. I mean, I try not to plan too many of my videos ahead of time these days, because I took a bit of a hiatus this year for about 5 or 6 months, where I worked on a lot of very, very big, high-minded ideas that just didn't get done. They all fell in the bin because I lost momentum on them, and I lost. I think my taste changed. So these days, I tend just to sort of pick an idea off the list that I do and try and do it within a couple of weeks, so that my mind stays focused on it. I have momentum, So it would be a different ballpark entirely if I was doing this full time and could have projects. I could have irons in the fire that were months and months and months in advance, because then you could sort of try out new things. But as it is, I'm trying just to sort of work within my genre, taking very small steps out when I can.
Do you actually find, as a follow-up, do you think it, in some sense, I don't want to romanticize it too much, but does it in some sense keep the passion element more vivid, that you do it as it's just a labor of love, like you're not doing it as your main income? Because I have noticed as well, there is that phenomenon online where sometimes the people who are doing really great early content decide to go all in, do it as their job, and it just kills their passion for it. It becomes a job, it becomes a stress and worrying about numbers and it seems like that those people actually seem to burn out faster than everyone else. Like, do you think having it as something on the side, a craft, has somehow, has it enhanced it or kept it at some level? Would it be similar if you did it full time? Do you think about it?
I think I think for me, it probably enhances it. I mean, I think that YouTube is all about taking risks. I think you look at some of the biggest creators, a lot of whom now are sort of doing huge live events and, creating huge, amazing bits of content, all of which require a huge amount of planning and expenditure and whatever. I'm not talking about all creators here, but a lot of the ones that I follow. And they are investments in your channel that it would be so easy to fall back on really easy content for you to make. But I do come back to my own philosophy of you needing to earn your place on the internet. You need to earn this place on YouTube. And so I think that not being able to sort of rest on my laurels, which I think relying on it for an income would tempt me to do, is probably a good thing. The fact that I only make one a month is probably a good thing as well. I can sort of be free of the previous idea. I can look objectively, again, afresh at the genre and be like, okay, what particular sort of gaps need filling here? For me, having a lot of off time as well as on time keeps me sharp and on the ball. But that said, I mean, if it was a full-time endeavor, I would have a team. I would have other things that would make it a lot easier. So there are trade-offs. But yeah, I mean, having these things as passions, you don't want to make your passion your full-time job in all cases, because there is just really, really something pure to be said, just for keeping that hobby as alive as it can be.
Absolutely. One thing you talked about earlier, by the way, that I'd also love to ask about, because it's so contrasting with how I've done things, is when you said earlier you've had videos that you took down because they didn't meet your expectations or what you wanted them to be. I have to admit, I've almost never done that ever in my whole time online. I've put loads of videos up, but because the problem is, this is why it's very different. I'm using the opposite philosophy. Like, if I do a video that I sort of start to think over the days afterwards, like, was that actually that good? My approach is sort of like, right, just get it out of everyone's mind by putting a load more videos out. Like, let's just push that out of everyone's memory, and we never need to think about whether that was bad or not. Essentially, my approach is like, make the next video better if you have a problem with that one. So what I would ask is this: what you're talking about is also something I've noticed that actually seems quite unique to the ASMR space, because I've seen some enormous creators that I thought did some incredible pieces of work take those videos down or hide the video or private it, etc., where it might have been out for years. I mean, I can remember a piece, I won't call the creator out by name because I'm sure they have their own reasons for taking it offline, but I remember there was a female creator who made an amazing high-end piece of, like, it was almost like movie level, like the artistry in it, and they sadly just took it offline or made it private. I don't know if they felt harassed or some nutter responded to it or what it might be, but they took it offline, which I have to say, in a consumer world, is quite shocking, the experience of being the consumer, because you would just imagine these things are always going to be available and that everyone's trying to pitch everything to you and everyone's trying to shove all the content down your throat. So what I would ask essentially is, like, where does that come from? Like, how do you decide to take a piece down? Does it happen often? Is it something you worry about? Like, to me, it's just an alien thing, so I'm interested to know, like, what the mentality is.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm sure it cuts differently for all creators. Like, it's, I think a lot of people in the ASMR space have their evolution through ASMR go to a point where they feel that some of their previous content doesn't necessarily represent themselves in a good light, or it maybe incriminates them in a way that they may not want to be sort of portrayed. Or maybe they're getting particular sort of hate for a particular reason, or times have evolved so that something isn't particularly relevant or whatever. I mean, I think that there are plenty of reasons to take a video down, but why I would do it is that I sort of see my, sort of seems wanky to say, but I see my page as a catalog. It's like an album in a sense. You know, you sort of view it as a whole, as something that, you know, potentially is greater than the sum of its parts, and that you can watch a selection of videos at once, and they potentially all fit together. They all have common themes. They all tell sort of similar stories. They all exist in a sort of meta narrative framework, and that when I've made the decision to cull things in the past, it's because I don't think that they hold up to what I want that collective catalog to be. Now, this is something that I will probably lose preciousness over when my content library grows to beyond, 50 videos. If I was to have 100, 200, 300 videos, I would, I think, be a lot less precious about curating that as much as a sort of gallery. But currently, because I have a very small number of videos on there, I want to make sure that a newcomer's experience to the page is as reflective of me as I can make it. But this is a singular ambition. I think that many other people feel very differently about. I think that maybe one of the creators in question would hide a particularly big video because it had been worked on by other people that no longer sort of sanctioned this video being made.
Yes.
And so this is sort of it's always a sort of living, breathing thing. But I do understand why people would want to keep up all their videos as well, because for some people they're a diary. It's all part of their journey, and people become sort of fascinated and invested in this journey of people as a creator. So whenever I take down a video, I don't do it lightly, because I know that people liked that video, people watched that video, people want to see that video as part of this creator that they've invested in. I'm their creator, and they want to feel a part of that. And I do want them to feel a part of that, but I also need to do things for me as well, I
don't think this would apply to your content too much, because actually, like, as you say, the sheer amount of volume isn't that high, and you've definitely put a lot of raw effort into a lot of them. But as you've managed to level your skills up in things like technical programs and graphics and lighting and stuff, does it ever make you get a bit concerned about some of the earlier videos? Like, maybe I should redo that, or I should take it down, or it isn't good enough?
I mean, to be honest, all of these things are sculpted by the time that I have to do them. And so there's a certain amount of, like I always say, that it's trying to, perfectionism doesn't really exist in the game of YouTube. You sort of have to, if you want to be a perfectionist, you have to work on perfecting your 80%, because it's never going to get to 100%. And so I always sort of set myself a time limit. Like, I'm never going to work on a video for longer than a month. And it's often no longer than 2 weeks. And I can only really I sort of have to just sort of race to the finish line. And what I do is a product of just the hours that I've been able to sink into it. So I don't look at some of my older videos and go, oh, wow, they're really crap, my skills really sucked, even though I might believe that. They're all a product of what I was able to do in the time and the circumstance, and all of that has always changed. So I don't really, I can't really point to an example where like I care about the graphics having fallen down, because at the end of the day, they're not really about that. Like, that's something I take pride in. That's something I really enjoy. But for people, I think a lot of people watching them, they're not going to begrudge me of a sloppy green screen or whatever, or something, or a light flashing off halfway through. Like, I think people, this is the other thing that I've sort of come to, I think, further to my point earlier on about drama being sort of quite good for engagement. It's good when you make mistakes, I've found, because they become the memes in your community. They become the things that people actually really enjoy talking about. That becomes something special to someone. They've noticed you mess up. They're like, oh, hilarious. He's relatable. You know, it sort of breaks down this idea that I'm actually this completely sort of infallible movie character, and actually no, I'm just like a stupid creator making things out of twigs. And I think when part of the scenery falls down, that's, for me, when it becomes actually real and soft and nice. So I don't really try and think too much about some of the mistakes of the past, like when I've fudged a word, or when I've completely forgotten, or just like messed up a historical fact, or something like that really people don't care about. People really like, I think, when I make mistakes. And so I've tried to enjoy when I make mistakes as well. So no, I don't think I look back at any of my other videos now and go, they really don't they're not really up to snuff visually.
One thing I do notice about your channel is, despite the incredible success of some of the videos and in general, like the high level of views overall, and you've done a very good job, as you say, curating it so it's got like a theme to it and it's a similar vibe between some of the videos, is the raw amount of subscribers isn't that high, mate. So I thought what I would do is, I've got a couple of questions I want to ask, and I'll ask it partly as a humorous conceit. I'll ask it in a very specific way. Well, what I'll ask you is a yes/no question, and after you say yes or no, then give me your thoughts on that particular topic. It'll be a way to explore some of the aspects of being a creator. So the first one I'll make intentionally silly, which is, would Atlas ASMR have millions of subscribers if Atlas was a sexy woman?
Oh, I don't think so. Should I explore why?
Yeah, go on, to give your thoughts.
So I completely agree. I don't really. I think that a lot of people do tricks in their videos to get people to, like, really real calls to action to get people to subscribe and like and whatever. Like, they'll tell people to do that. They'll go, I need you to subscribe now. I need you to like. I need you to leave a comment. Blah 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 blah. I don't like doing that. I don't particularly like sort of holding my cap in my hand and being like, please ring the bell, please, Christ. It's like. I find it quite off-putting, but I accept that it probably does work. And I accept that probably having more of a relationship with your audience probably does work. That cultivating a community probably does work. I think that me being a sexy woman probably doesn't change the fact that I don't do all of these things. Don't get me wrong, if I was a sexy woman, I would have more subscribers. I think that is just like a fact, right? I think that is just a fact. I think that's a fact across YouTube. I think that's a fact across ASMR. I think that the demographic of YouTube being what it is and what we've seen is able to be successful on the internet. I think that, you know, we just know that to be true. However, yeah, millions and millions. I don't think so. I think I would need to be better at the YouTube thing. You know, the sort of the YouTube, play the YouTube game a little more for me to have real subscriber success. But I also perceive it very much as a vanity number. Like I would care more about having. I would rather have highly viewed videos than have loads of subscribers. I think if I had 1 million subscribers and had you know, the views on my videos, I mean, I'd still be happy, but it wouldn't really sort of matter as much. I personally perceive it as a real win whenever I have a video that sort of hits, in terms of their views, hits my level of subscribers, because then I'm like, oh, okay, great. Theoretically, that means that all the people who subscribe to my channel have watched the video. I know that's not real, but like that sort of equates to that in my brain. So yeah. But to sort of distill the point of the question down, yeah, I think that the market for me being a sexy lady is slightly greater. It poses a very interesting question about whether or not a male ASMR creator or a female ASMR creator is a more successful product in today's market, because I think that once upon a time that it was dominated by female creators, and it still is.
So, yeah.
Massively so. But we've seen a rise in male creators. I mean, there will be nowhere near the amount of male creators, but I think that there's probably slightly more appetite for them now. Whereas back in the day, maybe 7-8 years ago, people were like, what are you doing? Why?
Sure.
why are you doing this? So it's an interesting question.
Along similar lines then, because if you notice, I'm purposely playing into the classic tropes of the industry. Along similar lines, would Atlas ASMR have millions of subscribers if he stuck to a 3 times a week daily schedule? You know, the one where they say every week it's Monday, Thursday, or whatever. You know, the classic approach they take. If you did that, would you have millions of subscribers, do you think?
I would say that is far more likely, yeah. So I don't think it would be millions. I think that potentially in the 2.5 years that I've done this, maybe just 2 years, I can't even remember. I think I started in lockdown. But I would say that if I did 3 videos a week in that time, I think that I would be getting pretty close. And I only say that mathematically rather than with any arrogance. Like I think that there would be a sort of direct multiple you could put on the videos of my channel and then see that increase by quite a lot. But there is something to be said, I think, for only releasing it once a month, because it really, you know, slightly ironically for ASMR, but it builds hype, probably in a very, very small way, but it makes people, I think, interested to see what I come up with next, which I don't think, and again, I say that with all humility, I think it's just, I know this because I can see this from how I wait for like someone like Articulate Designs video. I think he has a similar sort of upload frequency to me, whereas I really look forward to what he comes up with. And so I think that people probably have that perception of mine, and I think that if I did it 3 times a week, even though I like to think that the videos would, you know, in this theoretical universe have equal quality, I think that people would become more used to me, and therefore I might just become noise. So yes, to answer your question, I think that I would certainly probably have close to 1 mil if things were going the same way that they went for the rest of my videos. But it's untested, hard to say.
The last one I have within this little category goes like this. Would you also have, it could be millions, could be a lot more subscribers, if you intentionally tried to service what fans tell you they want?
No. I mean, I say that with all respect to what fans tell me that they want, and you know, some of my commenters and my patrons and my whomever have brilliant ideas, all of which I'm sure would do perfectly well on someone else's channel or even on mine. But I know that for me to be excited about an idea and for me to fully sort of stay motivated with an idea, it needs to originate in my own head in an organic way that has enough fire behind it that I'm not going to get bored of it immediately. And this is true, you know, like I say that I wouldn't necessarily take my subscribers' ideas. I don't take my own ideas. I have lists and lists and lists of video ideas that are never going to get made because they haven't sort of originated at the right time, or they don't sort of vibe with me now, or because for whatever reason. So it's really a sort of perfect storm of things, of inspiration, and it's often just by me, you know, watching something or playing a game or something where I'm like, something like that, or something that looks like that, or something like sounds like that would be cool on my channel. And so I think, you know, if someone else was feeding me amazing ideas that would make me have millions and millions of subscribers, then they would have the millions and millions of subscribers YouTube channel.
Yes.
So it's sort of, it's hard to really sort of, sort of judge that. But no, I think my answer is no.
Along these lines, that one last topic I have, I'll set it up like this, is the tricky thing about doing anything creative and putting it out on the internet. It's like what I said earlier about my own expectation for views and stuff. On the one hand, I'm not really doing it for anyone specific out there except me and what I wanted to do. But at the same time, if you told me it's going to get 0 views, that would take a bit of the luster off. It would sort of feel like, okay, like it was cool that I did it for me, but like, why am I bothering uploading this? So on some level, I am wanting some people to see it, whatever that specific specific audience would be. And obviously then we enter this domain where there's the dance with the algorithm and with the system and what the incentives are. And that's part of obviously what we just discussed there when I asked you those questions. Like, there are certain techniques that people use that are effective. There are certain ways you build the viewership, you build a sustained amount of subscribers, you increase the growth, you get the algorithm to be more happy and feed it to more people. What is your relationship in that sense? Like, obviously people will get a sense from it, saying earlier that you're doing it as a side hobby, etc. and stuff. Like, it's not like you live and die for the views or a certain amount of money, etc. But it is a dance, right? There's still a negotiation. Even as you're saying earlier, like, you might not want to say click the bell and subscribe, but you still got to do some of the things that make people at the end of the day subscribe and watch the video, right? So how do you square that off?
It's a very interesting dance. And I think, something I believe is true of theatre, for instance, is that theatre doesn't exist unless there's an audience. So if you are performing to an empty hall, I think that theatre is the thing that is created in the middle between the performers on stage and the audience. The reaction that you get from the audience, the feedback that you get from the audience, theatre is sort of made in the middle. And I do very much think that the same is true on YouTube, where, I mean, these videos would still look the same if they were playing to no viewers. However, the channel would not have developed with all the sort of little in-jokes and the little memes and the little sort of shifts in the direction and the little sort of like winks and nods and whatever, if it didn't have an audience, and if there wasn't sort of a sort of reason to drive this particular sort of narrative train forward. And so it's an interesting question. Obviously, it's an emotional dance that we have to do with ourselves as to whether or not sort of videos will get made if we do think that they're going to get fewer views, and if videos that do really, really well but don't necessarily, if we don't necessarily like them, how do we sort of reconcile that? It's an interesting question, but yeah, it's a balance that we're all trying to strike.